Welcome to the Black South podcast, South to America, where we reclaim the sacredness of the South, its stories, its people, its legacy. This podcast is inspired by Dr. Imani Perry's award-winning book, and we encourage you to pick up a copy. In Season 1, we're taking you to Durham, North Carolina, through the voices of community builders creating space for Black flourishing. Let's get into it.
All right, so we are here with the Bishop Clarence Laney. So many good things we've heard about you from people here in the city of Durham, North Carolina. We're very privileged to have you be a part of this conversation, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So we'll want to just jump right in and just ask you, what is the story of Bishop Clarence Laney, and how did you become pastor of Monument of Faith?
Well, the story of Bishop Clarence Laney begins in a very small rural community in Johnson County, which is about an hour east of Durham. And there I was raised in a very small, close-knit community. I was fortunate to have my mother and father. I am one of 7 siblings. And we were raised in a community where everyone looked out for each other. And I am the 6th of 7 siblings, and community was always a part of my formation. So I went to high school, went to middle school. I went to high school in that community, graduated, and then matriculated to college, where I majored in broadcast journalism. It was my goal to be the first Black Peter Jennings, for those old enough to know who Peter Jennings actually is. And but I was called to ministry at a very early age, and that was at the age of 13. And although I was young in my preaching call, I never thought or saw myself doing this full time. I thought I would be bivocational, have a main job, kind of do preaching on the side. And when I graduated from St. Augustine's College in Raleigh in 1986, I was having difficulties finding a job, difficulties finding a place to just kind of be. And I remember feeling dejected. I went to Bible study on a Wednesday night, and my pastor's wife was teaching. And she asked the question, how many of you have asked God to do something for you, and God has not answered that prayer? And of course, being in the church, who wants to be honest and to say, well, God has not answered my prayers?
Yeah.
But that particular night, I was just so frustrated. I raised my hand, and she said, well, what is a prayer that has not been answered? I says, I've done everything right. All I want is a job. And so she took her glasses off, and she looked at me, and she asked permission from the group that was present. And she said, can I help him? And they said, sure. And so I'm thinking it's going to be something profound,
Right.
that's going to open up all these doors. And she looked at me very candidly and said, God called you to preach. I was a bit confused because I knew that, but I wasn't quite sure what at that moment had that to do with me not finding a job. So after talking more to her and my pastor, her husband at the time, he then was very instrumental in me going into ministry full time as what we know then as a state evangelist. So I worked for my denominational headquarters for about 10 years, still with no intentions of being in ministry full time. At that point in my life, I was wanting to go into education and start a school specifically for African American boys. So after 10 years, the church in Durham became available, and I was asked by my then bishop if I would be willing to go and to serve interim for about 5-6 months. Sure, I can do that. Not a problem. Again, no intentions of staying. And so it's been 29 years and I am still here. So I think what was supposed to be interim, it clearly was God's design for my life to be here in the community of Durham. So that's pretty much, and of course, serving in the 29-year capacity, I, of course, was given the opportunity to serve on my denomination level as a bishop. Yeah.
Wow.
So good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is so awesome. I love how the parts of the story is so much of just listening to God. I feel like I share with folks sometimes, even Black South and what we're up to. I'm like, it's nothing that I planned, but it's everything that I feel like was the desire in me. And I think it's funny how God leads us in different ways into what our ultimate actually desires and hopes are, but it's not how we plan it. And so I feel like I see that. I feel like I see that in your narrative.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I said God surprised me quite a number of times.
Yeah. I love that. The second kind of question I'd love for us to talk about is, I think your witness in the community, from what we've been learning from the folks who connected with here in Durham, is how much you serve the community, in the sense that church is outside the four walls for you too, right, in an extent, and that your heart and mind is also for community change and social change. And so I'd love to hear from you, one, a little bit about the context that the church that you pastor, Monument of Faith, is at and in here in Durham. And then also, in what ways do you personally and the church help serve your neighborhood and serve the community?
Yeah, I came to Durham in 1996. And at the time that I went into Durham, to that community, it was incredibly blighted. There were boarded up homes. There was a 20-acre public housing complex that was being empty. Families were being displaced. And there just seemed to be no life in the community. There were some residents in the community who were raised in the Hayti community. And the history of Hayti is a great one, in that it has been a part of the Durham community for many, many years, back in far as probably the 30s. And at its heyday, there was over 300 businesses in Hayti. One of the residents who still live in Hayti said that everything that you needed was in this community. From the time that you were born, there was a hospital, there were schools, there were businesses, and of course, at the time of your death, there were funeral homes and graveyards. So you could live your entire life in the Hayti community and never have to leave. But in 64, Urban Renewal decided to come in and to put a highway to give people from the Research Triangle Park, which is just east of Durham, access to downtown Durham. And so they literally gutted the African American community, displaced families, displaced businesses. Many businesses were closed. People who were told that they would have a better chance at life, better accommodations, they never received what was promised to them. And so after finding out the history of the community, one of the questions that I asked initially was, why is it that we're here for the community? Because the church that I serve has been a part of this community since 1933. And so it has a history that comes alongside, or that's a part of the Hayti fabric of Durham. But I knew that if I was going to serve a congregation, it had to be a congregation that existed for the people. I always had this outward focus, I think in part because of my parents, my dad and my mom, who were not college educated, but they always served the community. We were economically, standards were poor, but my mom and dad always opened up their home for other people. They were feeding people. They were clothing people. They were providing shelter for people. So my dad was going through widows' houses and fixing things that broke down, or was helping kids who needed rides back and forth to school. So that's what I grew up with, seeing the church, if you please, outside of the wall. So it wasn't a far reach for me to think, how can we exist for the community? So I began to talk to those in the congregation. One of the concerns was that of public housing. So I began to do some work around public housing, particularly affordable housing in the community, as well as food insecurity, food bank, and how can we rally around to get a food source within our community. Gentrification was also an issue, and that maybe 20 years later, there was some desire to revitalize this area because of its proximity to downtown. And so now all of a sudden, what was a blighted community that nobody wanted to live in, now all of a sudden became profitable.
Right.
And we wanted to make sure that those who came into the community understood the history of the community. So it's been, when I look at the gospel, Jesus was always where the people were. You know, he spent very little time in the synagogue, but he was always among the people. And I think that if we are going to be followers of Christ, we should embody who Christ is. And that is a Christ who is incarnational, and that is God among us.
Thank you.
I think that story is so powerful because what I hear modeled for you and your parents was just this type of hospitality to care for people and to see people, which we see in the life of Jesus so much and so well, and seeing how that you just carried that into the work that you do in the city of Durham is really beautiful. And I think sometimes people forget how hospitable Jesus was, you know, and to be able to carry that into what ministry looks like is a really beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm grateful for my parents. My dad just became an ancestor 3 years ago on the 19th of this month.
Wow.
And so I think of him often, particularly this time of the year, and just the example he left for me and the legacy. I actually bear his name. So being able to live in that legacy of service is something that I hold to be very near and dear, particularly after his transition.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. You know, taking my breath out before, and so you see me coughing, just taking my breath out with everything. So good. I hear so much of the story of pain that's happened in the neighborhood that Monument of Faith is at here in Durham, in the Hayti neighborhood, and the erasure of the rich, vibrant African American community that was here, that I know has happened in places across the country.
Yes.
But what is perhaps a thing, one that you maybe have learned, or what is the things of beauty that you have seen from the folks who are in and around the neighborhood, despite their circumstance? What is one thing that you've learned from them while pastoring the neighborhood and pastoring the church? Or what is one thing of beauty you can see in their lives and tradition?
Yeah, I think the beauty and the story that they teach us is that of what our ancestors have taught us for years, and that is resilience. Miss Brenda, who I would like to lift up in this space, who still is a part of the Hayti community, I call her one of my sheroes. She has lived in the community her entire life. She lives in the house that her grandfather built many years ago. And they never left the community. Many in the community left because what the community was becoming. They sold their lands, they moved away, they moved to the suburbs. But Miss Brenda and many of her cousins stayed in the 700 block of Grant Street. And so what I see is resilience. I see pride. Many of their homes were surrounded by crack houses, surrounded by boarded up houses, surrounded by substandard housing. But that block was always kept so immaculate. Lawns were manicured. the houses on the outside were taken care of. And occasionally you would even see them sitting on their front porches, because I think that they were determined that I'm not going to allow the blight of my community to run me away from the community. So it's exciting now to see that things are somewhat coming back alive, to know that it's happening in their lifetime, when so many of their colleagues, so many of their peers actually died before anything began to happen. So I think resilience and even truth telling, just in terms of what happened to the community and the promises that were made to them that were never kept.
Wow.
That's so good. Was there something that you wanted to say? I saw you.
I mean, well, I think it's really beautiful, because something that we've even been talking about the last couple of days is this like shift, because in some churches that are multi-ethnic, you often hear them talk about reconciliation. And I don't like that word personally. I like having my own translation. Like, reconcile to what? You know what I mean? Like, it forces you to define, like, what are we being reconciled to? And the thing that the word reconciliation asks you to be reconciled to is really, white American culture, which has forced a lot of people of color and different ethnic groups to disregard and to let go of their culture. And so the word that we're using instead is like cultural preservation instead of reconciliation. Like, how do we preserve our culture and our heritage? And that's what I'm hearing as you describe the members of the community that you know that are part of a Monument of Faith, is this the resiliency to hold on when so much around them is asking, demanding, trying to force them to let go. And that's kind of what I'm sitting with. I'm hearing you say all of that.
Yeah, and I think when you're part of a historical African-American congregation, particularly when the city changes, because there was a time when I came to Durham, Durham was, I think, I don't want to say the quote, but it was predominantly Black. Right. It was a Black city. Everybody knew Durham was Black. And so there was this sense of pride that came along, that Durham was Chocolate City, if you please. But of course, as it has changed over the years, I think the African-American population has decreased opposed to what it was maybe 26, 27, 30 years ago. And so it's important that we, for those of us who are in the community, that we maintain our authenticity. That is not at the exclusion of anyone else. We just had an Indian from India who joined our church on Sunday. And prior to that, we've had not a lot, maybe 2 or 3 white Christians who have joined the church. And so the question was asked, so what do we do when, now the other people are coming? I says, well, when they joined, they knew this was a Black church.
Yes.
So we are unapologetically Black. We make sure the space is inclusive of everybody, but we don't apologize for who we are.
Yeah. So good. We need more of that. Switching kind of to talk about the Black church now as well. I think not only the Black church, but church in general is such a interesting conversation in just our world right now and society. I think when you think of relevancy and what's like spaces trying to push to be relevant and like get a bunch of people in the building, all the different things, they switch to these ways of being that sometimes some view might assimilate into one way of doing church that's predominant in a lot of white mega church type spaces. And then also, when just thinking about the Black church as well and its history and some of its hangups with Black folks, is some of the thing that you named before of like, man, there was such a hospitality from the church that I grew up in, and now there's some people who feel like the Black church's witness has maybe lost that, to try to become the mega. I'll try to be something different. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of that, all of that I just kind of named, of your own witness there at Monument of Faith, and how you just thought and think about these things leading a church right now in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's interesting because in seminary, which most are predominantly white, and the seminary that I attended was a United Methodist seminary. And so you take worship, you go to worship, and a lot of the tenets and what you're taught did not come out of the Black church tradition. And so you have to ask yourself, do I take these traditions from other non-Black spaces and bring them into Black spaces, which I did portions of that. But how do you do that while maintaining your authenticity as people of African descent? And of course, as the church grew, it was not growing at the level of some mega churches.
Right.
And every young pastor wants to have a church that, whether he admits or not, everybody wants to have the biggest church in the community, except the unlimited resources, etc. And so you have a tendency to look over the fence and see what those who are mega, what exactly they're doing.
Right.
But what I saw, they are doing some incredibly ministry, and I applaud them. But so much of it is not rooted in the Black church experience. And even for my Black brothers and sisters who go to multi-ethnic churches, they give up something in those spaces.
Yes, sir.
And what I was determined to do is to maintain our Africanisms, to use the word of the late Reverend Bishop Charles Harrison Mason, who's the founder of the Church of God in Christ, to maintain those African distinctives, even as we change. And I think that's COVID impacted how you do ministry, because I was texting some pastors on yesterday, and the question was, what happened to the choir? Can we bring it back? Because, you know, the choir was staple in the Black church. And now we've kind of shifted to praise teams and worship leaders, and all that has its place. But I think sometimes we kind of, we didn't learn that from the Black church experience. We learned from white folk. So at least to be able to critique why we do it, although we make it authentically our own. So I think with the Black church being very different in that in my lifetime, the Black church was the hub. It was the center of the African American community. There were no competing interests when it comes to churches. The church is the place you went for education, you went for religious formation. It was a place you would go for mass rallies and civil rights protests, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of your education came out of the Black church. A lot of our recreation came out of the Black church, because we had to create it when others would not give us the opportunity to do so. That has all changed now. And so a lot of people don't see the relevance of the Black church. They can go to the coffee shop on Sunday mornings and find community, or they can go to a soccer league and find community. So people are finding community in different ways that they did not find 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I think that's the challenge of the Black church. How do we remain relevant when our voices to some is becoming irrelevant?
Yeah.
That's powerful.
That is.
Yeah. I have a question about, there's something really unique and beautiful to me. I visited Monument of Faith one time. I know Kendall's gone a couple times. There's something really beautiful to me about the theology of Monument of Faith that you preach. And I'm thinking about the spiritual formation of the people of Monument of Faith. And I'm wondering, since the church's inception, has it always been that way? What has been the journey of growth, theologically speaking, for Monument of Faith? In particular, to when Monument of Faith chose to become an affirming church, because to be an affirming Black church is kind of unheard of, I feel like, in today's world, but so it's so needed. And so I just want to know the story and the journey of the growth of theology at Monument of Faith.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. It's been a journey. As I said, Monument of Faith was started in 1933, and we are a part of the larger Church of God of Prophecy, which is a part of the Pentecostal movement. And if you know anything about Pentecostalism, Pentecostalism is incredibly rigid in its theology. Pentecostal theology is very binary. It's black and white, right or wrong, up or down. There are no gray areas. You're either saved or you're not.
Yeah.
You're going to heaven or you're going to hell. There is no in between. And so I grew up in that tradition, but I think the beauty for me is I grew up in a very ecumenical household, in that my mother was raised AME. My mother's father was raised Baptist, and my dad and his family was Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ. And although I've only been a part of Pentecostal in terms of membership, I was raised in all of these different denominations. And so there was some dissonance between what I was told in Pentecostalism was saying, that I saw people in my family that I knew loved God and were good Christians, who did some of the things that they said you'd go to hell for doing. And so there was this, wait a minute, now my grandmother wear earrings and you telling me she's going to hell? I don't know if I can buy that or not. Or my grandmother, she wears pants. I don't know. I'm comfortable. My granddaddy dipped a little snuff, and there was this cognitive dissonance. And so when I came to Monument of Faith, it was a typical Pentecostal church, and it was very legalistic. And I came to Monument of Faith in '96, and then I decided to go back to seminary. All right. So I was accepted in seminary in '98, but I didn't start until '99. And so as I began to do my formal theological education, and I began to read scripture in a broader context, I began to experience God very differently from the God of my Pentecostal formation. And so as I began, and in the process of pastoring, I have a nephew who is same gender loving. In fact, him and his partner just got married last weekend. And I knew from a very small child that he was different. I just knew it. He had a father, he had a mother, he had a loving home. He was not abused as a child, but I just knew that he was gay. Right? And I always gravitated to him, perhaps more so than some of my other nieces and nephews, because I felt like I needed to protect him, to make sure that he was okay. And so I wanted, and in the process of pastoring, there were people in the congregation who were sharing their struggle with their sexuality. And to hear some of the stories that some of them have gone through, just to be affirmed as a child of God, just absolutely ripped my heart apart.
Wow.
And I did not necessarily have a theology of queerness or same gender loving. I just knew that this should be a place where you can be. And so I don't understand the theology behind all of it. I just want this to be a place to, and so that's what I started preaching. We supposed to be a house. God said this is the house for all people. I started preaching it, not so much with the intentions of being open and affirming, but just to say, regardless to where you are, Monument of Faith should be a place where you can come and find God. And so when the legislation went forth to legalize same-gender marriages, People began to ask questions about it. And so I had to really put my stake in the sand, and to figure out, where is pastor, where is God, and all of this. And when I read scripture, there's nowhere in scripture that I've read, and if you know of places, please help me, where Jesus ever rejected anybody.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And so I thought, well, if Jesus never rejected anybody, who are we as a church to reject people?
Come on now.
Yeah.
And so no one could answer that question for me, not at least to the point where I felt convicted.
Yeah.
And so, and then we had a minister who came out as being gay.
Yeah.
Very beloved member of the church, one who I love to this day, will fight for him if I had. And so we had to make a decision.
Yeah.
Do we throw him out and everybody looks like him? Or do we love him and allow God to use his gifts in this space? And as a church, we decided, hey, this is his home. He's a part of us. He's a part of our family. And if we can't be here, then none of us can be.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we became this open space. And it has cost us. Members have left. I think that membership, probably one of the reasons why membership perhaps is not as large as it was, is because I think a lot of Black folks still have issues with accepting of our queer brothers and sisters, or our queer siblings, I should say. So, but that's where we are. And I said, as long as I'm pastor, this is going to be a place where everybody can come and everybody can be. And so it's worked for us. We don't have a whole lot of queer members. We don't have a whole lot of same gender loving members. But they do know this is the space where they can come and not be demonized or sent to hell, but they can be affirmed and celebrated. And so it's just a wonderful feeling to know that all souls are welcome at Monument.
That's so powerful. I, for whatever it's worth, I just applaud you, Pastor Bishop Clarence Laney, because I think it takes a lot of courage to do something like that. And it just so affirms that this is possible.
Yeah.
Because I've never seen it in a traditional Black church. And so, as we've connected with a lot of people here in Durham, so many people speak so highly of you. And everyone's like, you got to connect with Bishop Laney. You got to, based upon even the work that we desire to do, they just so think that being connected with you and what you're doing is essential. And just having served as a pastor before in another context, I think, I can only imagine what it's like for the people to go there with you, like as your own theology was expanding, the time that it took for them to go there with you.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if you could put a time frame on it. Was it 10, 15 years of people like growing their theology along with you, or even if you could speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I say to my congregation that we all went to seminary.
Yes.
Right? So the beauty of coming to Monument of Faith is when I came, it maybe had 30 active members.
Yeah.
So it was a very small, close-knit, family-oriented congregation. So when I went back to seminary, I basically came back and taught what I was learning.
Sure.
Yes. Right.
I had never heard about the revised common lectionary. I started preaching from the lectionary, and never heard about Advent. I started observing Advent, and never heard about or observed Holy Week or a lot of liturgical seasons that we can come to enjoy. And so we just evolved, And so as a result of preaching, of course, at the time I was only in my 30s. So a young man attracts other young people. So a lot of young families would come. And so we just started being very intentional about studying and duplicating as much as we can the life of Christ. And so there was not tug of war, but there were some tense moments, people who challenged my theology, and people who didn't like it, and people who left, and people who were determined to run me away. So it's not been a beautiful or a cakewalk. It was some very, very, very hard times that I questioned why I was doing. As I said to one of my same gender loving peers, I said, it's like we've created a space. Oh, someone said, well, it's like you're creating a space for people who are not even here.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So we don't have that many gay people. So why we got to be affirming? Why we got to do all these things and create a space? I said, because I think it is what Christ would model. So just moving that theology needle, if you please, from more conservative to more, as some would say, liberal. I would just say more God-like. You know, I would say I started seminary in 99. So I would say, you know, over the last few years, we've been evolving. And even when I went back to get my doctorate, there was still this evolution, this education piece. And but the congregation, historically, Pentecostals have not attracted educated people. That's changing. But historically, we attracted people who were very marginalized. And did not, in some of my early formation, you were not encouraged to go to college. You were not encouraged to go to seminary. You were not encouraged to ask questions of your faith. And so what was happening in my context, there are a lot of folk who were raised Pentecostals who had the privilege to go on to higher education. And they were now thinking differently. And they thought they were going to have to leave the tradition in order to engage their mind, their heart, and their spirit. So Monument of Faith became this place where they could think and still feel. So it became somewhat of a safe haven for those who grew up traditional Pentecostalism, who may not acquiesce to some of the traditional teachings of Pentecostalism. And it also opened up spaces for people who perhaps were reared in other Black church spaces, but wanted to have somewhat of a more spiritual experience that was grounded in a deep thought out theology. So it's I tell people that Monument of Faith is a very eclectic place to be.
Yeah.
That's great. I believe that. I think I love, again, the witness of making that decision, not being this attempt or this fight just to be relevant, right, in culture and society, but to be loving and to love God and love people and have that be the answer of what that looks like in our time and context that we're in now. I just love all of it. And I'm excited to just be with you, along you and getting in good trouble, I'm sure, together here in the city when we reverse migrate here come May of this year.
Well, we're excited for you to join our family and our team and to bring some young energy. I think about John, when Jesus came on the scene, he said, I must decrease that you may increase. So as these younger, vibrant brothers and sisters come alongside us, I'm excited that the community and the history will be sustained, you know, that maybe not that even I couldn't sustain it.
Well, I just love, I think last time we visited Monument of Faith, you gave a message and mentioned this idea of remixing traditions, like how artists will sample different songs and then they'll remix it, right, for a modern sound. And I love that, and I feel like that's what I think for our own stories, that's what God's put in our own heart and mind. What does it look like to help remix some of the traditions? Excited to see what happens.
And the Black church is certainly being remixed, that's for sure.
There's no doubt about that.
Well, I think Bishop Laney, final question would just be, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of Monument of Faith within the city of Durham, for the people of Durham? If you want to speak.
And then also alongside that, I think the hopes and dreams of the community as well.
Yeah, I have many. Our one of the things of our church is to be a place to bring all peoples to Christ.
Yeah.
And so I would like for Monument of Faith to be a place where everybody can come and have a encounter with God, to see the community transform, to see grocery stores in the community, to see businesses in the community, not just ABC stores and check cashing places, but to see vibrant community businesses, to see housing in the community where not just the wealthy and the affluent can live, but also those who are middle income, or those who are even below the poverty line will find a space where everybody can peaceably coexist in the Hayti community. So those who are long-standing residents of Hayti, that they can maintain their homes, they can maintain their family legacy, but open up doors for new people to come in. And I also hope that those people who are moving into the community, that we can help educate them to know what this community is about. You're just not buying a house in Durham,
Right.
but you're buying a house in a historic African-American community. And some people do their research before they move in, but most don't. And so it's my hope to help them better understand the tone and tenor. So I have it currently now. If the two of you were to come into my office and we want to go get coffee, we either got to go over to South Point, which is a few miles, I guess, west of the church, or go over near Duke, or to downtown. But there should be the same things available in my community. I should be able to find a coffee shop where we can go and sit down and eat, or there should be a sandwich shop, or there should be a boutique. There should be things that we enjoy as people of color to be a part of our community and to be staples of my community. So I hope that when I leave, that Monument of Faith and the community of Hayti will be vibrant again, and to be alive again, where you can see sons and daughters of those who live in the community walking through the community again, feeling safe, feeling proud of the history that is a part of. And for the larger Durham, as Durham changes, I want Durham to be aware of the history. Durham became a safe haven for a lot of Black folk during even I read that when there was the Wilmington riot, that a lot of the people from Wilmington, Black people, came to Durham and resettled, because it was a place that they could come and continue their fight for freedom. And so I want Durham to continue to be the bull city. And that is that, bulls are not always tame, but they actually sometimes go and disrupt the narrative. And I think that we should continue to be, I like to call us holy disruptors, people who come in and make people uncomfortable, particularly when the least among us is not being cared for. So I want Durham to be a place for everybody.
Yes. Come on now.
I love that. Well, we look forward to joining you in that type of work.
Absolutely. Look forward to you joining us. Indeed. Indeed.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And we're just very grateful for leaders like you in the city that have done a lot of really wonderful work and laid a really strong, beautiful foundation. It's a blessing.
Thank you for your witness, your legacy. As you started talking, the sun started coming behind you. Going around into this holiness all around.
Oh, it's just the sun, the afternoon sun.
And so I appreciate you, and thank you for being with us and being on the South to America podcast and being among our first iteration of this.
Thank you for the privilege to be with you today. And I think about the words that says, I am because of you, and because of you, therefore I am. So thank you for your work and your witness, and all that you do to make the South a better place, and to amplify and to center our stories, so let's know that everybody in the South is not dumb and backwards.
Change the narrative.
Change the narrative, indeed. Indeed.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Black South podcast, South to America. Before we go, here's an excerpt from Imani Perry's book. I am American. That means something to me. Some common ground with others of this soil, even as the country feels irredeemably racist and maybe not worth saving. It is what Du Bois calls a two-ness, two warring souls, black yet American. You face it in its most raw truth below the Mason-Dixon line. To be an American is to be infused with the plantation South, with its black vernacular, its insurgency, and also its brutal masculinity, its worship of whiteness, its expulsion and its massacres, its self-defeating stinginess and unapologetic pride. If this speaks to you, grab a copy of her book and visit blksouth.org for more meaningful reflections. You can follow us on social media at blksouth. To help others find this podcast, leave a review, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more stories from the South.